Hi poets and writers, I'm Kaye Spivey. I'm going to talk about something a little bit different today. I don't normally talk about things going on the Twitter sphere on this channel, but something really caught my attention on, what was this, on Friday? I just really wanted to talk about it because I think that this person brought up some important points and a lot of other people brought up way more important points. So I'm going to talk about this. It's going to be a lot of my opinion, but I want to share some of the tweets as well, so I will have screenshots in the video. I'm not going to like beat around the bush. This is all in response to a tweet by Danielle Rose, and I'll go ahead and read it and I'm going to put it on the screen for you as well, where she says, "I wish poets understood that the general population has no interest in what we do, so when we speak we are speaking only to each other. The delusion that poetry is something powerful is a straight line to all kinds of toxic positivities that are really just us lying to ourselves." I'm gonna start the whole thing off by saying we're gonna start from a place of kindness, because she did end up getting a lot of like kind of mean responses to this in the end. And as she pointed out, she had a very small following. I think she's gained a lot of followers over this. But she had a very small following. She doesn't usually get any responses to tweets, so she had expected this was going to be like a venting, throw it out there and no one's going to respond to kind of post. This isn't like someone super powerful saying something that they normally should have really thought through. Like, as someone with a pretty small Twitter following myself, and I think hers is even smaller than mine, or it was, sometimes you don't really think through things. You just kind of get things off your chest and you don't get responses. So she really went into this, I'm sure, not thinking that anyone was going to say anything. So I think possibly she could have decided to word it better if she had expected a greater outcome, but at the same time, people saw it, people responded in mass. At the time I'm looking at this, there's almost 1,000 likes, there's tons of retweets. Like, this is something the poetry community is really engaged in at the moment. So I wanted to talk about my feelings about this. And I want to show you guys kind of the response around it. I only took a few screenshots because so many people had really good points, and I'll share a few, but there's so many more out there. Danielle Rose is getting really overwhelmed with the responses she's getting, but I think this is a great discussion, and so I wanted to bring it up and kind of go further my opinion about this and why I think this is a really important thing for us to talk about sometimes. So she has two major points, and so we'll talk about them in order. The first one is that she wishes poets understood that the general population has no interest in what we do, and when we're speaking, we're only speaking to each other. And I just want to say that this is such a like literary poetry scene mindset. Like, this is so university level, where yes, there are spheres, or like there might be like reading groups or things like that where the poets are just talking among themselves. That does happen, and it tends to be kind of a little bit of like a white upper class elitist kind of mindset to it. It really is a little bit looking down your own nose, you know? It's not the common way people perceive poetry. And what's really weird is that this is coming out today. Like, when I'm filming this came out yesterday. We're in a poetry renaissance, which actually I was flabbergasted how many people on Twitter didn't seem to like recognize the poetry renaissance that we're in. Like, are you going to discredit the humongous number of books being sold by these Insta poets? Like, we are in an enormous wave of poetry being at the forefront of people's interests. Like, this wave has not passed, and this isn't something that happened years and years ago. Like, we are in a wave right now that people don't seem to grasp. In America, we're in a wave of poetry reading right now. Readership is up. People are interested and engaged in poetry now. But some people didn't seem to see it that way. Some people were like, oh, poetry might come back again. To what? To when the contemporary poets were having their last big movement? Like, we are in it now. And it's funny to me that a lot of people don't see that because the genres maybe that they're writing in or the scenes that they're interested in are not the ones that are super popular. But that does not mean that poetry is not having a moment these days. I mean, I'm sorry. How many books has Rupi Kaur on her own put out that are super, super popular? R.L. Stine, like, there are people selling huge Amanda Lovelace, people with multiple book deals in poetry that people are buying in mass, that they're everywhere. And that's just Insta poets. That's just one type of poetry. Also, like, Danez Smith, people know their name. And let's not go any further than Amanda Gorman. I'm sorry, that is all people could talk about after the inauguration. One young poet standing up at the presidential inauguration and like knocking people's socks off. People who lined up in mass to pre-order her book that had not even been put together yet because she had just written that poem for the inauguration, but people were so moved by it that they wanted to buy it right away. We're not talking to ourselves. Because if we were, you would be implying that all of those people who are desperate for these books of poetry, who are buying these poetry mods, that everyone is a poet. People who are writing poetry are not the only people consuming poetry. On the other hand, and I did tweet about this because I feel that this is very, very true, and I feel like this is something that a lot of poets go through. Poets individually can often feel like we're shouting into the void, like our best work is not being heard, it's not being responded to, that the poetry that we are interested in, maybe our favorite poet isn't very popular, maybe we've put out a great amount of work and people really aren't responding to it at all. Maybe we've sent out to hundreds of literary journals and all of them have been rejections. Like, it can feel like nobody is listening, nobody is around you. It can feel like as much effort as you're putting in, nothing is coming back to you. And that is common. That is a normal and natural response to the way that poetry works. And so it can feel like you're really isolated. It can feel like poetry doesn't matter to people who are outside of the poetry sphere. As someone who does poetry on YouTube, we are an extremely small niche community. There are not a lot of people talking about poetry. There's not a lot of people looking for poetry videos. There's not a lot of people engaging with poetry videos. Like, we are a tiny little community. But at the same time, when an outlier breaks away and something does become popular, someone does engage with it, when a spoken word poet puts up a video from an open mic night and suddenly everyone is listening to it, even though that might be an outlier, literally everything that's popular on that level is an outlier. The songs that play on the radio that you get sick of because they're so popular, they're playing all summer long, the like summer bop that you finally just get sick of, that is an outlier too. The sports star who's making millions of dollars, they are an outlier too. Your favorite celebrity is also an outlier. Like, things that gain extreme popularity are always going to be outliers. That is just the way popularity works. There can only be one person at the very top at a time, and I just can be looking at lots and lots of things, but someone's gonna pop up all of a sudden. And that happens more often than you think with poetry. Like, it's not just Amanda Gorman, it's not just Rupi Kaur, it's not just Robert Frost. Like, let's start talking about old dead white dudes who you know the name of, who are poets, who are still taught today in your schools. Like, just start thinking of some names. I'm sure you can come up with like one for every finger on your hand. There are lots of them. And there are tons and tons of people who are still getting read, who are still impacting people, who are still writing poetry that non-poets are actively engaging with. Like, it is not something that we do and avoid, even though it absolutely feels like it. It absolutely does. And just think also about how many people, let's just talk about like of Twitter. As you scroll down your page, how many people you look at and you're like, that is a damn good tweet, or like, I'm with you on that, but you don't retweet it and you don't like it. How many people look at your work and think that was really good, but don't engage with it? Fanfiction writers, how many people read your fanfiction but don't leave a kudos, don't leave a comment? Like, there are so many, and it could be something where that is then a person's favorite thing. Like, they could love your poem so much they're like printing it on their wall, they want to get it tattooed on their body. Like, this could be something that like changed somebody's life and you might never know about it. That's part of the beauty of creating art in any form, is that sometimes the engagement is on a very, very personal level and we can't really belittle that. And I think it felt very belittling. I think a lot of people engaged with her comments and felt like she was belittling the huge communities. And that's not even to say that she's coming at this from a very Western white perspective, because as many people pointed out, that is not how poetry is engaged with throughout the rest of the world. Shelley Flowers had a great tweet. I'll just highlight it because I think she had a phenomenal point. She said, "I'm just thinking about my Cuban family members who were illiterate but would have someone read out from a book of poetry as they rolled cigars in the tobacco factory, about my truck driving abuelo who sang Punto Guajiro and wrote poetry with his friends at his social club." And she also said the impact poetry has had on the Caribbean should be its own field of study. People also said this about poetry in Indian culture. People are talking about how Bollywood is full of poetry. These aren't the only places where poetry is widely read, widely appreciated. There are also places where poetry is widely banned because of its political implications, where poets have been ostracized. Poetry and poets have a major impact in many other places in the world. People were also pointing out within minority groups. This is somewhere where people can come up from the underground and speak words that get through to people, in a way that an essay would not, or just a speech would not. Like, poetry is able to punch through, and sometimes poetry is able to punch through a glass ceiling and make real change. Like, it has happened, and it has happened so many times throughout history. It's a little bit ignorant to just ignore that. Throughout the world, poetry has had an impact, and it has also created a reflection of society. It has been able to show what the people were thinking in times of great distress or political uprising, and it endures. We're still reading poetry from centuries ago. We're still reading poetry from people whose lives we cannot imagine. Poems have endured for so long and have been cherished for so long that we are getting a glimpse into lives of people who have been dead for so long it's hard to even contemplate. And you could say that that's true of any literature, sure. And yet it's poetry that's lasted the longest, and poetry that keeps coming back in different forms and different cultures. Like, yes, there are also stories, but a lot of stories have been poems. This is an art form that has never not been with us. Even in times when it's against the law to be a poet, poetry has still endured and come out of those times. So plenty of people had really good takes on this, and that was kind of my take, was just simply that what she was saying was kind of narrow-minded. And I think one of the best measures of this is simply how her take created this enormous amount of discourse, that people felt so passionately about what she said that they were spreading it and talking about it and engaging with it, that poetry means so much to so many people that they had to say something and stand up for it. Like, that's by itself proven her wrong, just in the amount of discourse that this has created around itself. And I think that's amazing. I think it's fascinating. I think it's a lot of fun to see how many people poetry means something really important to. Talked about that long enough. I want to go into the second thing that she mentioned, and that's, in her words, "The delusion that poetry is something powerful is a straight line to all kinds of toxic positivities. They're really just us lying to ourselves." I think she says it in a way, especially connected with her first thought, that just seems really dismissive. It seems a little like maybe she's going through something and venting, which is okay, but again, she did post it on a public forum and the public did respond quite strongly to it. But there is toxic positivity in the poetry community, and we can just say that absolutely 100% is true. I've experienced it here on my channel as well as on other platforms, where especially when you start to point out things like that poets don't tend to make a lot of money, or that poets don't get a lot of support when it comes to publishing and things like that, where people will get defensive and people will get kind of nasty and like, how dare you, like, who are you to speak about this, and things like that. You know, that kind of engagement is necessary and it's always going to happen on a public forum, but at the same time, like, there is this notion that poetry should be perfect and good and all people should love it just because it is, and that there's no such thing as bad poetry and things like that, or that poetry should be able to sell. And anybody who especially comes on my channel and is like, you're wrong, poetry can sell millions, like, how can you say that poetry doesn't make money, and oh, that's so, like, selfish of you. Every time they're trying to sell something, whether it be a course, whether it be a new poetry book, whether it be a how-to book, anything, they're always trying to sell you something, because there are realities and there are unrealities. And the reality is, we are in a publishing time where, although many poets are selling very well compared to poetry historically and as a whole, and we are in a renaissance, most people do not make any money selling poetry. It's just a reality that we are in. Like, it sounds like two different things, but like, also, how many children become millionaire sports stars? Like, this is just something that happens. This is just the way the world works. Most people make no money playing sports. Most people make no money writing poetry. These are facts. And anyone who comes trying to tell you, no, poetry is so easy to make money writing poetry, they are wrong, and they are trying to sell you something. That's just straight up. But there is this notion of really toxic positivity that poetry should be respected and loved universally, and people should be buying poetry and paying more for poetry. And I agree with that. I agree with it. It's just also not the way things are. But the other side of it is the poetry is always good, and if it comes from the soul, then it is like perfect. That is so harmful. Like, poetry is the same kind of art form as any other art form. People work very, very hard. People practice poetry. People study poetry, and people read other people's works and think about it critically. Like, this is not a genre that can just exist as a perfect thing all by itself. Like, not everyone can sing, okay? Not everybody is good at baseball. Like, not everybody is good at drawing. It's the same thing for poetry. And so when people are just like, oh yes, poetry, oh so good, and there is this mindset in the poetry community that it should be like that, that everyone should just be like, yes, yes, whatever poem you stood up on stage with, you're so brave. And they are so brave. And that's the other thing. Like, I'm glad we're so nice. I'm glad we're so, like, helpful and positive, but at the same time, there can be a toxic community that can breed some really toxic behaviors and some really toxic feelings about poetry as well, because you have to be able to look at art in a critical lens, and you have to be able to take criticism about art and not have it just devastate you. And especially in a world where we're trying to, you know, buy and sell poetry, people being devastated by it is really not so helpful. People being devastated by someone having something critical to say is bad. And people feeling defensive about someone saying, like, I don't like this type of art. If someone's like, hey, I don't enjoy Insta poetry, and people are like, how fucking dare you? Like, that's not helpful. Like, that's just making the poetry community look bad. And like, we should defend poets and we should defend poetry, but at the same time, like, there are masters, and there's a reason that they are masters, there's a reason that they endure, and there are people who are not so good at it, who just enjoy a craft. And you can have a poetry hobby, and people can be like, hey, your poetry isn't good, but you can still enjoy writing it. Like, you can still sing, even though you will never be able to land a record deal or whatever you call it, get on a label as a singer. There is really a lot of toxic positivity in the poetry community that can be addressed, that should be addressed, and that really wasn't so addressed within this Twitter thread. People were much more focused on the really inflammatory first part, and then on the fact that, like, yeah, people do talk about poetry in a way that they feel almost entitled to publication because they have attempted and written a poem. But at the same time, she says that the idea that poetry is powerful is a straight line to this toxic positivity, and I think that's wrong. There is a branching tree of things that poetry, the idea of poetry being powerful, go to, and I do think there is a branch that heads off into toxic positivity, like I was saying, that somehow poetry is innately good and powerful. But there are poems and there are poets who are truly powerful, and they go in a different direction. I just think the dismissive language was really the problem, and I think had she rethought and worded it better, we could be having a discussion about like, why is it that poetry communities can be really toxically positive? Why is there toxic positivity in our community? Like, where is it coming from? Like, we could be delving into that rather than talking about the first part, which is just wrong. I think I got everything off my chest that I wanted to. I will say I'm really not so cool with the way people are really kind of dogpiling on her for this comment, but at the same time, like, she worded it in a way that of course everyone's first instinct was to get defensive about it. Of course, we're all poets. We all love poetry. Of course we're gonna get defensive about poetry, especially when it's taken in such a dismissive way and in a way that just isn't true for most people in most of the world. You don't even have to look past this year. Amanda Gorman by herself disproves her entire argument, which is just like, if one young poet can disprove the entire thing you said, the discussion around it isn't even a year old yet. Like, where have you been? What rock have you been under? Like, it feels like that. And so I do think we should come at this from a kinder level. Like I said, one of the best things about the poetry community is the kindness, but all the people who were upset and outraged, they're right too. It's nice when we can all kind of come in and have discussions about this and really bring to light how important poetry is to so many people and to so many communities, and how people feel about poetry, like, deeply. Like, this all comes from a good place, and I'm really glad that we got to talk about this. But at the same time, like, it is kind of sad that it happens and we have to all like feel like we have to defend poetry every time. I chose to use her actual name and her actual tweet in this because I think this has gotten popular enough that people know who she is. She didn't delete the tweet, and I also think people making it harder to find discourse on things kind of starts a rumor mill. So yes, I did leave her name, and yes, you can go and read the tweet from her Twitter yourself. At least as of right now, she has gained a ton more followers, but also everything is still there, and it seems like she's taking this in a really professional manner because she is a professional within the poetry community. So I don't think that saying her name or the other names of the people whose tweets that I thought were really interesting, I don't think this is harmful to any of them. And I would encourage you to go and read, because she has posted quite a bit more since all of this has happened, and she's kind of seen the impact. Like, she has taken this with grace. I mean, she wrote yesterday, so it seems I accidentally trolled poetry Twitter today. I apologize, that wasn't my intent. I'd like to go back to mumbling into the void to the same 15 people now, please. And then today she tweeted one that said, "Poetry doesn't have to be socially powerful to be worthwhile, meaningful, important. There's no requirement for much of anything in poetry. This is an ultimate freedom to do what you believe will be best for you and those around you. Be content to touch what you touch." I thought those were nice sentiments. I think, yeah, she's taken this very gracefully. Obviously, in terms of being on Twitter, this kind of backlash can only help your platform. So honestly, in a way, good for her and good for all of us to be able to have these discussions. Hey, this is Editing Kaye here. So I was getting ready to post this, and then I discovered that the magazine that Danielle Rose worked as an editor on, Barron Magazine, has decided to part ways with her due to what she tweeted. The words we say are not always without consequence. They felt that she was misaligned with their vision, and they have parted ways. So I just wanted to bring that up, that I did see that that was kind of the consequence of all of this. But in all things give and take, I guess she had not worked there for very long. I guess this is kind of a lesson as well, but I just wanted to bring it up that I did see that. That's what I wanted to talk about today, just get it all off of my chest. Let me know if you come from a culture and community that poetry is really important to. Let me know what your experience with poetry is and what you thought of her tweet and how you initially responded, because I would love to know. That's gonna be all from me today. Thank you so much. Hope you're having a great day. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. Bye.